Have you ever stayed silent because telling the truth felt expensive? Have you ever agreed when you actually disagreed? Have you ever remained available when you were already exhausted? Have you ever stayed somewhere longer than you should have because leaving meant disappointing people? Have you ever left a conversation feeling that you performed well but did not fully express yourself? Not because you lied, and certainly not because you were fake. Because something inside you was managing consequence. Perhaps you called it maturity. Perhaps you called it patience. Perhaps you called it kindness. Perhaps you called it loyalty. And sometimes it was, but surely not always. Sometimes it was fear. Sometimes it was adaptation. Sometimes it was the quiet belief that belonging must be earned. And that belief has a cost. This is not a message about acceptance. This is a message about belonging. And there is a difference. Belonging is one of the oldest human needs. Long before careers, long before status, long before social media, long before modern life. Long before all this, people needed tribes, families, villages, communities. Because to belong often meant protection. To belong often meant support. To belong often meant survival. And because belonging mattered, people learned to adapt. They learned to adapt not because they were weak. On the contrary, they learned to adapt because they were intelligent. You see, a child learns the room. A child learns the atmosphere. A child learns consequence. A child learns what receives approval, what receives criticism, what creates peace, what creates tension, what makes people lean closer, and obviously, what makes people withdraw. And because belonging matters, adaptation begins. The child becomes quieter, more agreeable, more useful, more careful, more acceptable. And often the adaptation works. And that is why it survives. Because the child understands that she starts receiving less criticism, less conflict, more safety, more acceptance, more belonging. And this is where things become, say, difficult. Because every successful adaptation creates temptation. And the temptation I'm speaking is terribly simple. It says, keep doing what works. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, an unspoken agreement quietly takes shape. You may stay if you remain agreeable. Oof. You may stay if you remain useful. You may stay if you remain predictable. You may stay if you do not become too much of who you are. Strong. This agreement is rarely spoken aloud. And that is exactly what makes it difficult to see. Because nobody says abandon yourself. Nobody says become smaller. Nobody says disappear. No. The message is more subtle. The message says you may stay, but only if this version of you stays, not that one. At first the compromises feel small. It's like a truth left unsaid, a preference ignored, a boundary postponed, a disagreement swallowed. Nothing dramatic, no. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing worthy of immediate concern. And which is precisely why it repeats and repeats. Then the small compromise becomes familiar. The familiar becomes normal. And the normal becomes, this is just who I am. But is it? Is it really? Or is it who you learn to become in order to remain accepted? There is a difference, a profound one. Many people believe self-abandonment is dramatic. Usually it isn't. Usually self-abandonment is gradual. It is a quiet erosion. A series of tiny, unnoticeable departures. One preference at a time. One truth at a time. One boundary at a time. One decision at a time. All this until a person begins feeling unfamiliar to themselves. And this feeling is not because they changed, no. It is because they disappeared. They disappeared not all at once. They disappeared politely, They disappeared gradually. They disappeared reasonably. At first, the question is, how do I belong? A reasonable question, yes. An intelligent question, definitely. Sometimes, even a necessary question, of course. But eventually life asks a different question. And the question that life asks is not, how do I stay? The question that life asks you is, what am I becoming in order to stay? Oof, that question. That question alone changes everything. Because many people discover they are preserving belonging by sacrificing presence. Many people confuse acceptance with belonging. They are not the same thing. No, not even close. Because acceptance says you may remain. Whereas belonging says you may remain as yourself. And believe me, the difference in this is gigantic. Because one requires performance, the other it just requires presence, just that. One asks you, what must I do to stay? The other asks you nothing. Because your existence is not under negotiation. You see, in life, at some point, every mature person encounters a difficult question. What exactly am I preserving? The relationship? The friendship? The role? The approval? Or merely the fear of losing them? Because those are not the same thing, no. And confusing them creates consequence. This is not a message about becoming difficult. This is not a message about becoming cold. No. This is not a message about becoming unreachable. Far from it. This is a message about remaining present. About remaining connected to what is true. About remaining connected to what is real. About remaining connected to yourself. Because if belonging requires you to abandon yourself, you surely do not belong in that place. This is not because the people are evil. This is not because the place is evil, no. This is not because anyone intended harm. This is simply because belonging and self-abandonment cannot coexist indefinitely. Eventually one consumes the other. Either belonging expands to include truth, or truth is sacrificed to preserve belonging. There is no permanent middle ground in here. So the answer is not rebellion. The answer is not aggression. No. The answer is not becoming difficult for its own sake. No. The answer is presence. The willingness to remain connected to what is true, even when remaining connected to what is true creates discomfort, even when it creates disappointment, even when it creates consequence. Because belonging built upon truth is stable. Belonging built upon performance is fragile. Many people fear rejection. Few people notice they have already rejected themselves in exchange for belonging. So I urge you to remember this. If belonging requires you to abandon yourself, then you do not belong there. Because the price of belonging should never be yourself. And for those who require positioning beyond what is shared here, there are forms of work that are not conducted in public. Access exists. The goal is not to become harder. The goal is not to become colder. The goal is not to become smaller. No. The goal is to remain present. Because belonging may matter, yes, but self-abandonment was never the price, and it never will be.